What happens when prejudice collides with power at 35,000 feet? On a routine transatlantic flight, a decorated flight attendant, blinded by her own assumptions, singles out a black man in business class. She decides, based on his simple hoodie and quiet demeanor, that he doesn't belong. Her condescension turns to open hostility, culminating in a humiliating public accusation he's too poor to be in her cabin. But she has no idea who she's talking to. She's about to learn that some people don't just fly on the airline, they own it. This isn't just a story about a mistake. It's about a single moment that unravels a life and sparks a revolution within an entire corporation. Stay with us to witness the shocking revelation and its life-altering consequences. The gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines was a familiar lullaby to Marcus Vance. It was the sound of progress, of connection, of a world being stitched together, one flight path at a time. From his seat, 4A, in the business class cabin of Aura Air Flight 715, he had a perfect view of the curvature of the Earth beginning to assert itself against the deep blue of the upper atmosphere. The flight from New York's JFK to London Heathrow was one he'd made hundreds of times, yet the simple magic of ascent never failed to stir something in him. Today, however, he wasn't a titan of industry or a boardroom strategist. He was simply a passenger. He wore a plain dark gray cashmere hoodie, impossibly soft, but utterly unbranded, a pair of well-worn jeans and classic white leather sneakers. His only accessory was a simple watch with a black leather strap, its value known only to a connoisseur, its face telling a story of quiet elegance, not loud extravagance. He was flying incognito, a secret shopper in his own empire, a practice he undertook twice a year to get an unvarnished look at the customer experience he was ultimately responsible for. The business class cabin of Aura Air's flagship A380 was designed to be a sanctuary. Pod-like seats in muted tones of cream and silver noise-canceling headphones, resting on polished wood veneer side tables, and the promise of attentive, personalized service. Yet from the moment he had stepped on board, a subtle chill had followed him, one that had nothing to do with the aircraft's climate control. Her name, according to the small silver tag pinned to her impeccable uniform, was Brenda. She was a senior flight attendant, probably in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back into a severe, perfect chignon. Her movements were sharp, efficient, and practiced. She greeted the passengers in the seats around him with dazzling professional smiles. The man in 3A, a portly executive in a tailored suit, received a warm, "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. Can I get you a glass of champagne before we take off?" The woman in 4C, dressed in Chanel, was offered a magazine with an almost reverential dip of the head. When her eyes landed on Marcus, the smile didn't just fade. It was repossessed. Her lips thinned into a flat line of professional obligation. "Can I see your boarding pass?" she asked, her tone clipped. It was a request she hadn't made of anyone else around him. Marcus, unfazed, simply retrieved the pass from his hoodie pocket and handed it to her. "4A," he said calmly. Brenda studied it for a moment longer than necessary, her eyes flicking from the paper to his face and back again as if searching for a discrepancy. Finally, she handed it back without a word. No offer of a pre-departure beverage, no welcome aboard. She simply turned and continued her duties. Marcus watched her go, a familiar, weary feeling settling in his stomach. It was the calculus he'd had to perform his entire life. Was it malice or a bad day, prejudice or a misunderstanding? He preferred to gather more data before reaching a conclusion. As the flight leveled off at its cruising altitude, the service began. Brenda commanded her section of the cabin with an air of theatricality, presenting menus as if they were royal decrees. Again, the pattern emerged. She took orders from the passengers in front of him, behind him, and across the aisle, laughing at a joke from Mr. Henderson, complimenting the woman in Chanel on her briefcase. She moved around Marcus as if he were a piece of furniture, an obstruction in the aisle. Her junior colleague, a young man named Alex, eventually noticed and came over. "Sir, have you been helped yet?" Alex asked, a genuine concern in his eyes. "Not yet, thank you," Marcus replied, offering a small, appreciative smile. "I'll have the sea bass, please. And just a sparkling water for now. An excellent choice, sir." From a few feet away, Brenda shot Alex a look of pure venom, a silent, furious reprimand that he seemed to shrink from. The message was clear. Later, when Brenda was distributing hot towels from a pair of silver tongs, she served everyone around Marcus. When she reached his seat, she paused, her hand hovering before abruptly turning away to restock her tray, leaving him without one. It was no longer subtle. It was a deliberate, pointed campaign of exclusion. Sarah, the young woman in seat 5A. Behind him, a tech entrepreneur who had recognized Marcus from a Forbes article, but had the good sense to keep quiet, watched the entire exchange with growing disbelief. She saw the empty space where a towel should have been, saw the way Brenda's back was turned squarely to Marcus. She felt a knot of anger tighten in her chest. An hour later, Marcus decided to stretch his legs. He walked to the front of the cabin near the small self-service bar and galley area, and gazed out a porthole window at the vast, empty expanse of the Atlantic. "Can I help you?" Brenda's voice sliced through his thoughts. It was laden with suspicion, as if she'd caught him somewhere he shouldn't be. "Just enjoying the view," Marcus said, turning to face her. "The view is the same from your seat," she stated, not asked. She took a step closer, crossing her arms. Her eyes did a slow, insulting appraisal from his simple sneakers up to his unadorned hoodie. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper, "sometimes passengers from the back of the plane get curious. They wander up here thinking they can just help themselves to the amenities." Marcus's eyebrows rose. He remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "Is that so?" "Yes," Brenda continued, now feeling emboldened by his silence. She clearly interpreted his calm as confusion or intimidation. "This section is for business-class passengers only. The economy cabin has its own facilities." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was in her eyes an intruder, a stowaway from the cheap seats who had somehow slipped past the curtain. "I assure you," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I am in the correct cabin. I'll be the judge of that." Brenda snapped her professional veneer, cracking completely to reveal the raw prejudice beneath. "I saw you when you boarded. People like you. You think you can game the system. You probably bought the cheapest economy ticket and waited for the crew to be busy to sneak up here." The insult was no longer just about his seat. It was about his character, his integrity, his very presence. Sarah in 5A had taken off her headphones, her mouth agape. Mr. Henderson in 3A looked up from his laptop, intrigued by the unfolding drama. "This has gone far enough," Marcus said, his patience, a resource he possessed in near infinite quantities, finally beginning to fray. "Oh, it hasn't gone nearly far enough," Brenda retorted, her voice rising in volume, attracting more attention. "I've had it with people trying to get things they haven't paid for. This is a premium cabin for premium clientele. It's clear you can't afford to be here. So why don't you just admit it and go back to your real seat before I have to call the captain and have you arrested for theft of services when we land in London?" She stood there, arms akimbo, a self-appointed guardian of a gate she had long since decided he was unworthy to pass through. The accusation echoed through the quiet cabin, a declaration of his supposed status for all to hear, too poor. Doesn't belong. She had no idea the ground she was standing on was a chasm, and it was about to open up beneath her. The silence that followed Brenda's accusation was heavier than the aircraft itself. It was a vacuum sucking the air and the low hum of the engines out of the cabin. Passengers who had been feigning sleep were suddenly wide awake, their eyes darting between the defiant flight attendant and the unnervingly calm black man she was publicly shaming. Sarah, in 5A, felt a surge of adrenaline, her mind racing. Should she say something? Record this. Her hand instinctively tightened around her phone. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held Brenda's furious gaze. In that moment, he wasn't just a passenger. He was an observer studying a specimen. He saw past the uniform and the chignon to the deep-seated bitterness that fueled her. It was a look he had seen before in boardrooms at country clubs in the eyes of loan officers from decades past. It was the look of someone who defined their own worth by who they could exclude. "You want to see my boarding pass again?" Marcus asked, his voice even almost gentle. "Is that what this is about?" "Don't play dumb with me," Brenda sneered, mistaking his composure for weakness. "Your boarding pass is probably fake. I want to see some real identification. I want to know who you really are, because you are certainly not a business-class passenger on my flight." At this point, the purser, a tall, distinguished man named David, arrived on the scene. He had been in the forward galley preparing for the next service and had been alerted by the palpable tension. "Brenda, what's going on here?" he asked, his tone low and authoritative. "David, thank goodness," Brenda said, turning to him with an air of vindicated relief. "This man snuck into the cabin from economy. He refuses to return to his seat and is causing a disturbance." David's eyes fell on Marcus. He saw the simple clothes and registered Brenda's assessment. His professional training screamed de-escalation, but his institutional bias whispered, "Believe your colleague." Sir David began addressing Marcus with a tone that was professionally polite, but carried an undercurrent of official weariness. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. If you could just show me your boarding pass and return to your seat, we can resolve this quietly." "I am in my seat," Marcus stated, his gaze shifting to David. "I was standing here looking out the window. Your colleague has accused me of being a thief." "Brenda is a very experienced flight attendant," David said, defaulting to a defense of his crew. "She wouldn't make such an accusation without reason." "Please, sir, let's not make this difficult." The united front was now clear. In their eyes, he was the problem to be managed, the disruption to be smoothed over. The assumption of his guilt was their starting point. "You're right," Marcus said softly, nodding his head once. "Let's not make this difficult." Brenda smirked, a triumphant, ugly little expression. She thought he was finally conceding. David looked relieved, anticipating a swift resolution. Marcus turned his body, slightly reaching not for the pocket of his hoodie where his boarding pass was, but for the back pocket of his jeans. He pulled out a worn, black leather wallet. It wasn't flashy, no designer logos, just the soft, creased leather of long use. He opened it slowly, deliberately. His movements were economical and precise, drawing the eyes of everyone watching. He bypassed the slots holding his credit cards and driver's license. He reached into a hidden sleeve at the very back of the wallet, a place for things one didn't need to access often, but needed to keep secure. He slid out a single card. It wasn't a credit card. It was made of a matte black anodized metal that seemed to absorb the light in the cabin. The only markings on it were laser-etched in a simple, elegant silver font. At the top was the Aura Air logo, a stylized A that resembled a soaring bird. Below the logo were 3 lines of text. "Marcus Vance, Chairman of the Board and Majority Shareholder, Aura Air Group. He didn't hand it to them. He simply held it flat on his palm, angled slightly so they could read it. Brenda's eyes scanned the text. Her brain registered the words, but the meaning failed to compute. She squinted, leaning closer, as if a different angle might change what was written. Marcus Vance. The name sounded vaguely familiar from corporate memos or news clippings she'd ignored. Chairman of the board. The words hung in the air, nonsensical, impossible. David the purser saw it at the same time. His face, which had been a mask of professional authority, seemed to collapse. The blood drained from it so quickly he looked gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes, wide with horror, darted from the metallic card to Marcus's calm, impassive face. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. He suddenly remembered the face from the cover of the annual report. The man who had been hailed as the airline's savior 5 years ago, who had bought a controlling stake when it was on the brink of bankruptcy and engineered its spectacular turnaround. Brenda finally looked up from the card, her own face a canvas of disbelief warring with dawning sickening comprehension. The smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind blotchy patches of red. "My Name," Marcus said, his voice retaining its unnerving quiet, each word landing like a perfectly placed stone, "is Marcus Vance. And contrary to your assessment, I can in fact afford this seat." After all, he paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "I own it. And the one you're standing on. And the wings that are keeping us in the air." He slid the card back into its sleeve and returned the wallet to his pocket. He had not raised his voice. He had not gestured wildly. He had simply presented a fact, an irrefutable, world-altering fact. The sound that finally broke the silence was a small, choked gasp from Brenda. Her hands, which had been on her hips in a posture of defiance, fell limply to her sides. Her entire body seemed to shrink, caving in on itself, as the colossal career-ending, life-shattering gravity of her actions crashed down upon her. She had not just insulted a passenger. She had not just misjudged a situation. She had publicly humiliated the single most powerful person in her entire global corporation. Sarah, in 5A, slowly lowered her phone, her recording forgotten. Her jaw was hanging open. She felt a shiver run down her spine. It was a scene more dramatic than any movie she had ever seen. Mr. Henderson in 3A quickly buried his face in his laptop, suddenly desperate to become invisible. David the purser finally found his voice, but it was a strained, trembling whisper. "Mr. Vance, sir, I had no idea. I am so profoundly sorry." Marcus turned his cool, assessing gaze on him. "Were you sorry a minute ago, David? Or are you sorry now because you know who I am?" David flinched, as if struck. The question was unanswerable, and they both knew it. The revelation detonated in the cabin with the force of a silent bomb, leaving a crater of excruciating awkwardness in its wake. The remaining 5 hours of the flight to London stretched ahead like a prison sentence for the crew. David the purser seemed to be in a state of controlled panic, his face pale and slick with a fine sheen of sweat. Brenda was a ghost. She had stumbled back into the galley, her face ashen, and slumped onto a jump seat, staring at the floor, as if the answers to her shattered future were written there. David rushed to Marcus's side, his demeanor now transformed into one of frantic, obsequious reverence. "Mr. Vance, please, allow me to apologize on behalf of the entire crew. Brenda's behavior was unacceptable, inexcusable. Is there anything at all I can get for you? A bottle of our finest champagne? The Dom Perignon. Perhaps a meal from the first-class menu? Marcus held up a hand, stopping the torrent of panicked offers. David, he said, his voice low, but carrying an immense weight. What I wanted was to be treated like any other passenger in this cabin. With dignity. That is no longer possible. Is it? No, sir. Yes, sir. David stammered, his professionalism completely deserting him. I don't want special treatment, Marcus continued, his eyes unwavering. I want you to understand what just happened here. Your senior flight attendant didn't just have a bad moment. She engaged in a pattern of escalating hostility based on a prejudiced assumption. She ignored me during service. She denied me the same basic amenities she gave everyone else. She publicly accused me of being a liar and a thief. And you, David, Marcus's gaze hardened. You stood right there, and you validated her. You asked me to cooperate to prove my innocence, rather than questioning the grotesque accusation your own crew member was making. David's head bowed in shame. You are right, sir. I failed. There is no excuse. No, Marcus agreed. There isn't. He looked past David towards the galley, where Brenda was hidden from view. I fly like this, dressed like this for a reason. I need to see the real Aura Air, not the one that performs for VIPs. Today I saw it, and I am profoundly disappointed. He turned away a clear dismissal and sat back down in seat 4A. He picked up the in-flight magazine and opened it, creating a wall between himself and the frantic purser. He didn't read a single word. His mind was racing, processing the incident not on a personal level. He had grown thick armor against such slings and arrows long ago, but on a systemic one. This wasn't just Brenda. This was a cultural rot, an attitude that could be allowed to fester and erupt at 35,000 feet, meant the problem was on the ground, in the training rooms, in the corporate handbooks, in the hiring practices. The rest of the flight was a masterclass in tension. The other passengers in business class avoided making eye contact with anyone. They spoke in whispers. The cabin, once a hub of quiet luxury, now felt like a library where a bomb scare had just been announced. Service continued, but it was a hollow pantomime. Alex, the junior flight attendant, now handled all service to Marcus's seat, his hands trembling so badly he nearly spilled water on him twice. Each time Marcus just gave him a quiet, reassuring nod, which only seemed to make the young man more nervous. Brenda remained in the galley, effectively removed from duty by a shell-shocked David. Once Sarah from 5A got up to use the restroom and caught a glimpse of her. She was on the crew satellite phone, her back to the cabin, her voice a raw, cracking whisper. She was speaking to what sounded like a union representative. Sarah could only catch fragments. Said he was the chairman. No, I didn't know. He was wearing a hoodie. What do you mean there's nothing you can do? Fired. But my mortgage, my seniority. Her voice broke on a sob, a sound of pure despair. For a fleeting second, Sarah felt a sliver of pity, but it was quickly eclipsed by the memory of Brenda's sneering, confident cruelty just an hour before. As the plane began its final descent into Heathrow, the pre-landing announcements crackled over the PA system. The familiar, cheerful voice of the captain was a bizarre counterpoint to the funereal atmosphere in the business class cabin. David approached Marcus's seat one last time, looking as if he had aged 10 years since takeoff. "Mr. Vance," he said softly. "I have already filed a preliminary incident report via ACARS to our London station manager, and to corporate headquarters in Dallas. They are aware of the situation. The station manager will be meeting you at the gate. Marcus simply nodded, not looking up from his magazine. And Sir David hesitated, his voice thick with emotion. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. Not for who you are, but for how we treated you as a man. We should have been better. I should have been better. This time Marcus looked at him. He saw genuine remorse in the man's eyes, a shame that went beyond the fear of losing his job. He saw a man confronting a failure of his own character. Thank you, David, Marcus said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. Remember this feeling. This is where change begins. The wheels touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow with a gentle bump. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, the other business class passengers remained seated, even after the seatbelt sign switched off. No one was in a hurry to deplane. No one wanted to be anywhere near the fallout. When the jet bridge connected and the door was opened, a man in a sharp suit, his face a mask of anxiety, stepped onto the aircraft. This was Robert Cole, the London station manager for Aura Air. He ignored all the other passengers and made a beeline for seat 4A. Mr. Vance. He began, his voice low and urgent. Robert Cole. On behalf of Aura Air, London, I am so terribly sorry for the experience you had on this flight. Marcus finally closed his magazine and stood up. He looked past Robert towards the galley. Brenda was being escorted off the plane via a rear service door by another member of the ground staff, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, avoiding the gaze of every passenger she had served. Her career with Aura Air, a tenure of over 20 years, had ended somewhere over the North Atlantic in a moment of supreme, self-inflicted arrogance. The experience isn't the problem, Robert Marcus said, picking up his simple backpack. The culture that allows it to happen is. We need to talk. The VIP lounge at Heathrow, typically a haven of tranquility, for Marcus felt like a war room. Robert Cole, the station manager, hovered nervously, offering beverages Marcus didn't want, and apologies he was tired of hearing. Marcus had waved him to a seat and was now pacing in front of the large window overlooking the airfield, his phone pressed to his ear. On the other end of the line was Richard Hayes, the CEO of Aura Air Group, speaking from the corporate headquarters in Dallas. Marcus, I am speechless! Richard's voice crackled thick with a mixture of fury and panic. I just got the alert from the flight ops center and read David's report. Unconscionable. I've already spoken to HR. Brenda's employment is terminated effective immediately. Her access is revoked. She'll be flown back to New York in an economy seat on the next available flight. We'll pursue this to the fullest extent. It's a disgrace. Firing her is easy, Richard Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He stopped pacing and stared at an Aura airplane pushing back from its gate. It's a neat, tidy solution that lets us pretend the problem is solved. But it's not. What do you mean she's the one who— She's a symptom, Richard, not the disease, Marcus interrupted. Think about it. For her to feel that comfortable, that empowered to publicly humiliate a passenger based on the color of his skin and the clothes on his back means she felt secure in her assumptions. It means she knew, consciously or not, that the system would have her back. And it almost did. Her purser, a 25-year veteran, defaulted to believing her. He saw a black man in a hoodie, and his immediate reaction was to treat me as the threat. What does that tell you about the culture we've built? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Richard, a brilliant logistician and numbers man, was being forced to confront a problem that couldn't be solved on a spreadsheet. This isn't just about one bad apple. Marcus continued, his voice rising with a controlled passion. This is about the barrel. Where is the mandatory, meaningful diversity and sensitivity training, not the check-the-box online module we have HR send out once a year? I'm talking about real confrontational in-person training that forces our employees to look at their own biases. Where are the clear zero-tolerance policies that are communicated from the very top? Why isn't dignity a core metric in our performance reviews right alongside on-time departures? Marcus, our policies are... Richard began defensively. They're not working. Marcus cut him off. I am living proof that they are not working. I'm the chairman of the board, and I was treated like a criminal on my own airline. What do you think happens to the black doctor or lawyer or tech entrepreneur who doesn't have a metallic ownership card in their wallet? Who do they complain to? An automated email address, a customer service agent who offers them a 5,000-mile voucher to make the problem go away. This stops now. Robert Cole, sitting just a few feet away, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was hearing a conversation that would undoubtedly reshape the entire company. What do you want to do? Richard finally asked, his tone shifting from damage control to collaboration. He knew Marcus wasn't just venting. He was laying the groundwork for a revolution. I want a complete overhaul of our service training from the ground up. I want to bring in the best DEI consultants in the world, people like Dr. Evelyn Reed, to design it. I want every single employee from the baggage handlers to the C-suite, including you and me, to go through it. And I want to create something new. Something that turns this disgusting incident into a force for good. Something new, Richard asked. A foundation, Marcus said, the idea crystallizing in his mind as he spoke. The Aura Ascent program or something. A multi-million-dollar scholarship and mentorship fund. We will actively recruit and sponsor underrepresented individuals who want careers in aviation. Future pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, corporate leaders. We'll find talent in communities we've overlooked, and we will build a pipeline that changes the face of this company and maybe even this industry. We will fund it personally, Richard, out of our own pockets to start. This won't be a corporate PR stunt. It will be our legacy. Meanwhile, Brenda's world was contracting into a single, terrifying point of failure. After being discreetly escorted to a soulless ground operations office, she was met with a video call from her union representative and a senior HR executive from Dallas. The conversation was brutally short. Her actions were a gross violation of company policy and basic human decency. They cited witness statements, including a detailed account submitted by the passenger in 5A, Sarah Jenkins, who had emailed customer service the moment she had a Wi-Fi signal. Brenda's long years of service, her commendations, her clean record, they all evaporated in the face of her flagrant, inexcusable conduct. The union rep, a man named Tom, had tried to argue for a suspension for mandatory retraining, but the evidence was too damning, the victim too powerful. "Brenda, my hands are tied," he said, his face grim on the screen. "They have you dead to rights. There's no fighting this. She was fired. Blacklisted." The word was already out. A friend at another major airline texted her, "Heard what happened on the 715. It's all over the internal network. No one will touch you after this." Her professional life, the only identity she had known for nearly 3 decades, was over. She was now just a 49-year-old woman with a mortgage she couldn't pay, and a skill set that was suddenly worthless. She sat in the sterile office, the silence ringing in her ears, and thought about her choices. The sneer, the condescending whisper, the loud public accusation. It had all felt so justified in the moment, a righteous defense of her domain against an interloper. Now replayed in the stark light of consequence, it was nothing but ugly, pathetic bigotry. She had built her own gallows and walked right up the steps. Later sitting in the cramped middle seat of 38B in economy on the flight back to New York, the ultimate humiliation, she looked out the window. She saw the flight attendants working, laughing with passengers, performing the job that had been her entire life. Every smile, every professional gesture was a fresh stab of regret. She didn't just lose a job. She had lost her place in the world. And for what? For a brief, intoxicating moment of feeling superior to a quiet man in a gray hoodie. 1 year later, the lobby of the Aura Air Global Training Center near Dallas was buzzing with a new kind of energy. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a large brushed steel plaque on the wall. It read, "The Vance Initiative. Dignity is our highest destination. Dedicated to fostering a culture of respect and creating pathways for the next generation of aviation leaders from all communities." The incident on Flight 715 had become a legend within the company, a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and training sessions. But for Marcus Vance, it had become a catalyst. He had channeled the cold anger of that day into a constructive, unstoppable force for change. The Dignity in Service program, designed by the renowned sociologist Dr. Evelyn Reed and her team, was now a mandatory week-long immersive course for every employee. It was not a lecture, it was a workshop. It used role-playing, frank discussions about unconscious bias and personal testimonials to deconstruct the very kind of prejudice Brenda had displayed. David the purser from that fateful flight had become one of its most powerful advocates. After a period of intense review and retraining, Marcus had personally intervened to save his job, seeing in him not a lost cause, but a man who had been genuinely profoundly changed by his failure. David now often co-led sessions for new pursers, using his own story as the ultimate example. "I stood there," he would tell the wide-eyed trainees, his voice steady and humbled, "and I saw a uniform, and I saw a passenger's clothing, and I made a choice. I chose the uniform. I failed to see the man, I failed my crew, I failed the passenger, and I failed myself." Your first allegiance is not to your colleague. It's to the principles of human decency. If you see a fellow crew member, senior or junior, treating a passenger without dignity, you are not just empowered to intervene, you are required to. That is the new Aura Air standard. The Vance Initiative was an even greater success. It had awarded over 50 scholarships in its first year. Young men and women from backgrounds historically underrepresented in aviation were now in flight schools, in aircraft mechanic certification programs, and in corporate internships with the airline. Marcus made a point to meet every recipient. Today, he was on a flight from Dallas to San Francisco, and the lead flight attendant in the business class cabin was a sharp, bright-eyed 24-year-old woman named Maria Sanchez. She was one of the first graduates of the flight attendant training program sponsored by the initiative. She served him his pre-departure water with a smile that was both professional and genuinely warm. "Welcome aboard, sir. It's a pleasure to have you with us today." She had no idea who he was beyond being a passenger in 2A. To her, he was simply a customer, deserving of respect exactly as it should be. Throughout the flight, Marcus watched her work. She was attentive to everyone moving through the cabin with a grace and confidence that belied her short time on the job. She treated the elderly woman struggling with her carry-on with the same patience and warmth as the high-powered CEO type across the aisle. She was the living embodiment of the culture he was trying to build. As the plane was on its final approach, Maria came by his seat. "Mr. Williams," she said, reading the pseudonym on his ticket, "I hope you've had a pleasant flight with us." "It's been excellent, Maria." "Truly," Marcus said, giving her a sincere smile. "Your service is outstanding. You have a bright future with this airline." Maria beamed. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot. I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for the Vance initiative. It changed my life." Marcus's heart swelled. This was the real return on his investment. This was the true consequence, not punishment, but progress. Thousands of miles away in a quiet suburb outside Philadelphia, Brenda scrolled through job listings on her laptop. The screen was filled with openings for administrative assistants, receptionists call center operators. Her severance package had long since run out, and she had sold her condo to cover her debts. She now rented a small one-bedroom apartment. She was no longer the sharp, severe woman from Flight 715. Her hair was its natural brown, no longer pulled back so tightly. There were dark circles under her eyes. The arrogance that had been her armor was gone, weathered away by a year of unemployment and introspection. She had been forced to confront the ugliness within herself, the bitterness and prejudice that had cost her everything. She picked up her coffee mug and took a sip. In the corner of the cafe where she was using the free Wi-Fi, a news program was playing on a small TV. A reporter was doing a feature story on corporate philanthropy. Suddenly, Marcus Vance's face appeared on screen, followed by images of smiling young scholarship recipients standing in front of airplanes. The Vance initiative at Aura Air, now in its second year, is being hailed as a model for corporate social responsibility, the reporter said. By turning a negative incident into a positive force for change, Chairman Marcus Vance has not only transformed his company's culture, but is also opening doors for a new, more diverse generation in the skies. Brenda watched her coffee forgotten. She felt a complex, gut-wrenching mix of emotions, regret, shame, and a strange, distant sense of awe. She had been the catalyst for all this good, but in the worst way imaginable. Her moment of hatred had inadvertently sparked a movement of opportunity and dignity. The world had moved on, had improved itself, not just in spite of her actions, but because of them. The true consequence, she finally understood, wasn't the loss of her job or her home. It was being left behind by the very world she had tried to gatekeep, forced to watch from the sidelines as it became better, more inclusive, and more decent without her. It was the crushing, permanent knowledge that she had chosen to stand for something small and ugly when she could have been a part of something beautiful. 3 years had passed since the incident on Flight 715. For Aura Air, they were 3 years of radical, substantive transformation. For Marcus Vance, they were 3 years of relentless, focused work, turning the ugly specter of that event into a beacon for his entire industry. The Vance Initiative was no longer a fledgling program, but a celebrated institution. The dignity and service ethos was not just a training module. It was woven into the very fabric of the airline's identity, a genuine point of pride for its employees, and a major competitive advantage. Aura Air was now consistently ranked #1 in customer satisfaction, not just for its luxurious cabins, but for the universally acknowledged respectfulness of its staff. Marcus was at Chicago O'Hare, connecting from a board meeting in the city to a tech conference in Seattle. He no longer flew incognito. His work was done in the open, now his presence a source of inspiration rather than a test. As he walked through the bustling terminal, Aura Air employees, gate agents, pilots, customer service reps would subtly nod their expressions, conveying a deep, earned respect. It wasn't the fawning deference he'd received in the immediate aftermath of the incident. It was a shared sense of mission. He was not just the boss. He was the man who had insisted their jobs were about more than just transportation. They were about dignity. His flight to Seattle was delayed by an hour. With time to spare, he wandered through the terminal, his mind on the keynote speech he was due to give. He needed coffee. He bypassed the trendy, well-known chains and walked towards a smaller, less crowded kiosk tucked away in a quieter corridor. It was called Sky Bean Coffee, a generic concessionaire with a tired-looking logo. The line was short. A couple in front of him received their drinks and left. Marcus stepped up to the counter looking at the menu board behind the employee. "I'll just have a large black coffee, please," he said, pulling his wallet from his jacket. The employee, a woman, kept her head down, her movements mechanical as she grabbed a cup. "That'll be $3.50, she said, her voice a low, flat monotone. There was no energy in it, no life. It was the voice of someone simply enduring the minutes of their shift. Marcus held out a $10 bill. As she reached for it, her hand brushed his, and she flinched a strange, almost electric jolt. She finally lifted her head to look at her customer, and in that instant the sterile, anonymous airport corridor ceased to exist. The world contracted to the 4 feet of linoleum counter between them. It was Brenda. But it was a Brenda weathered by time, and hardship eroded into someone almost unrecognizable. The severe, perfectly coiffed blonde hair was gone, replaced by shoulder-length brown hair streaked with gray. It was tied back simply with an elastic band. The sharp, imperious features he remembered had softened and sagged, pulled down by a permanent exhaustion. Her face was pale, her skin puffy around the eyes, which were no longer the flinty blue chips of defiance he recalled, but were now clouded with a deep, abiding sadness. She wore a faded navy blue polo shirt with the Sky Bean Coffee logo embroidered on the chest. It was a size too big for her, hanging limply on her frame. The polished, formidable guardian of the business-class cabin was gone forever. In her place was a tired, middle-aged woman serving overpriced coffee to strangers. Recognition dawned on her face a second after it had on his. Her eyes widened, and every last bit of color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly, grayish white. Her mouth fell open. The professional practiced numbness she used as a shield shattered, and raw, abject terror poured into its place. Her hand, the one holding his $10 bill, began to tremble violently. A few coins clattered from her other hand onto the counter. Mr. Vance," she stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. She looked past him towards the terminal, as if expecting security guards to materialize out of thin air. She looked at him as if he were an executioner who had finally found her after years on the run. Marcus simply stood there, his hand still outstretched with the money. He felt a jolt of pure surprise, but the anger he might have expected to feel was absent. He had processed that emotion years ago, converting it into the fuel for his mission. Seeing her now stripped of her uniform, her pride, her power, he felt only a profound and hollow sense of melancholy. This was the final human consequence, far removed from the corporate HR memos and legal proceedings. "Brenda," he said. His voice was quiet, even. He didn't infuse it with accusation or pity. He just said her name, an acknowledgement that he saw her, that he knew who she was. That simple acknowledgement seemed to break her. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. I am so sorry," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of panicked confession. "I know it's too late. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it. That day, there's no excuse. I was an ugly person, a bitter, hateful person, and I deserved everything that happened, everything." She swiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture of futility. I want you to know," she continued, her voice cracking. "I think about what I did every single day, not just because I lost my job. Because of the look on your face. Because I was so sure I was right. So sure I was better. It was poison and I was full of it. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. He saw a woman not making an excuse, but offering a confession. This wasn't a plea for her job back. This was the raw testimony of a soul that had been through a crucible of its own making. He finally pushed the $10 bill across the counter towards her. The coffee, Brenda. She fumbled with the cash register, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the keys. She gave him his change, her eyes fixed on the counter, unable to meet his gaze again. He took the coffee she poured and placed the change in the small tip jar, which was nearly empty. He could have walked away then. He had every right to. The transaction was complete. But he didn't. He stood there for a moment longer, watching her try to compose herself, to rebuild the fragile wall of anonymity she lived behind. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question, so simple, so direct, so human, seemed to stun her more than his appearance had. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with confusion. She had expected rage, condemnation, or at the very least a cold, dismissive silence. She had not expected concern. She started, then stopped, unsure how to answer. "I'm working." It was a statement of fact, but it contained a universe of struggle. Marcus nodded slowly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as the villain of his story, but as the person standing before him now. "Prejudice is a heavy burden to carry, Brenda," he said, his voice soft but clear. "It poisons the person who carries it more than anyone else. It seems you've finally put it down." A sob escaped her, a sound of profound, wrenching release. It was the sound of a truth she had lived with for 3 years being spoken aloud by the one person she thought would never acknowledge it. Marcus turned to leave, but paused one last time. He looked back at her, this ghost from his past, and offered not forgiveness that was hers to find, but something far more practical. "Every one-to-one deserves a chance to build a new life, Brenda," he said. "Don't waste yours." He then turned and walked away without another word, melting back into the flow of travelers heading towards their gates. He didn't look back. Brenda stood frozen behind the counter, clutching a cleaning rag. She watched his tall frame disappear into the crowd. The encounter, which had lasted no more than 3 minutes, had completely undone her. But the tears that now flowed freely were different. The terror had subsided, replaced by a raw, painful yet cleansing sense of catharsis. He hadn't forgiven her. He hadn't forgotten. He had simply seen her. He had acknowledged her brokenness and her effort to exist beyond it. In his final words, he had given her not an absolution, but permission. Permission to stop defining herself by her worst moment and to start living in the quiet, humble present. As Marcus walked toward his gate, he took a sip of the coffee. It was mediocre, slightly burnt, but he barely noticed. The chance encounter had settled something deep within him. Firing Brenda, launching the initiative, transforming the airline that had all been about fixing a systemic problem about corporate justice. This sad, quiet meeting was something else entirely. It was human closure. The last embers of the old anger had finally cooled, leaving behind not a scar, but a quiet, peaceful space. He reached his gate and sat down, looking out at the airfield, where an Aura air jet was being serviced, its silver logo gleaming in the afternoon sun. He thought of the young, hopeful faces of the Vance Initiative scholars. He thought of Maria Sanchez and her bright, genuine smile. He thought of David the purser, now a respected teacher of other leaders. And he thought of Brenda, a woman adrift in the anonymous sea of a crowded airport, just trying to get through the day. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the CEO, Richard Hayes, with an updated positive forecast for the quarter. Marcus smiled faintly. He was no longer looking back. His gaze and the future of the airline he had reshaped was pointed firmly forward towards the horizon. That single defining moment on Flight 715 could have ended in a simple lawsuit or a quiet firing. Instead, it became a turning point. Marcus Vance proved that true power isn't just about revealing who you are. It's about what you do with that power after the world is watching. He didn't just seek retribution. He demanded a revolution of values. He transformed a personal insult into a corporate mission, creating a legacy that will uplift thousands and redefine an industry for decades to come. This story is a powerful reminder that our actions, especially those born from prejudice, can have consequences we never imagined, and that the most profound response to injustice is not to tear down, but to build something better in its place. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama consequence and incredible transformation. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light. Thank you for listening.